All right, welcome to the second installment of my basic quilt block tutorial series. This time we're going to be making quarter square triangles. We're going to make two of them. Let me go over some standard things in case you haven't seen things before. I'll be saying this every single time. Standard things about my tutorials is that I, as a general rule, make my measurements exact. I don't normally write my patterns so that they're oversized to be trimmed down. There are a couple of exceptions, and when those exceptions happen, I will be explicitly tell you that. Also, I have a distinct dislike for sewing unsupported bias seams. I will very rarely ever tell you, hopefully never, to cut a triangle and then sew along the unsupported bias edge of that triangle. I prefer to have you cut squares and rectangles, sew a diagonal across the square rectangle, and then cut it apart and get two of an item. Also, standard practice for all quilt block writers is that for most of our measurements, we're going to tell you the finished size. These are 6-inch quarter square triangles. Now, if you measure them, they're going to measure 6.5 because there's a seam allowance, quarter-inch seam allowance all the way around. But we're going to call these 6-inch because once they're put in your quilt, that's what you're going to see is 6 inches square. So my measurements, like all standard quilt block writers, are going to be referring to finished quilt block sizes. On the very rare occasion when measurements may require you to know the unfinished size, I will tell you that. All right, so let's get started making our quarter square triangles. First off, let me tell you the math about quarter square triangles. You're going to need to start with 2 squares of fabric, one of each color, and the math on that is 1.25 inches larger than the finished size. So these are 6-inch finished quarter square triangles. You're going to need to cut 1 square each that is 7.25 inches square. And that's all there is to it. Let's get started. First, cut 1 square each of 2 different fabrics that is 1.25 inches larger than the desired finished size of your quarter square triangles. On the back of one of these squares, usually the lighter ones here, pen shows up better. On the back of it, draw a single diagonal line. Stack the 2 squares right sides together. Sew a seam 1/4 inch on either side of the drawn line. Cut the 2 halves apart on the drawn line. You now have 2 half square triangle units. Open these up, press the seam allowances to one side, and trim the dog ears. On the back of one of these half square triangles, draw a single diagonal line which crosses the previous seam. Stack these 2 half square triangles right sides together so that the seams nest. Make sure the half squares are turned 180 degrees from each other so that the same colors are not lying directly on top of one another. Sew a 1/4 inch seam on either side of the drawn line. Cut the 2 halves apart on the drawn line. Open each quarter square triangle unit, press the seam allowances to one side, and trim the dog ears. All right, I hope you had fun making quarter square triangles with me. Super easy. Basically, you're making half square triangles and then you're making half squares out of those half squares. Super duper easy block to make and fun to look at. In future, I will have some variations on 2 color half square triangles, so look out for those tutorials. In the meantime, thanks for watching this tutorial. Make sure you give my YouTube video a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, check out my webpage, charmneedles.com, share this around to all your quilting friends, and we'll see you next time.